All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be talking about the S58 engine. A couple weeks ago, I posted a deep dive into the B58, and we talked about all of the engineering details that make the B58 such a capable platform. So I'll have that link down in the description in case you guys are interested in seeing that video. But a lot of you guys in the comments asked for an S58 version as well. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to look at the S58 technical training, which is also available. Again, I'll provide that link for anybody that wants to read through it. And it has over 100 pages of just details on how BMW took the B58 to the next level when they created the S58 engine. Now, keep in mind, I don't actually own an S58 powered vehicle, but like a lot of you guys, I just like keeping up with the development. We've seen some insane numbers and just a crazy amount of performance that indicate just how capable the platform is. So kind of as they say, the B58 is you, but the S58 is the guy that your girlfriend tells you don't worry about. So we're going to go ahead and satisfy your insecurities and talk more about it in this video, and hopefully you guys find it useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. Now, to start off, I want to reiterate that the S58 is, in fact, an iteration or step up from the B58. A lot of times they'll tell you all of the things that are different about it and how many unique parts it has, but in the grand scheme of things, it's an overbuilt B58 TU engine. And a lot of what they've done is based on two different things. One is the fuel system. They had to adapt a lot of things because the fuel system is set up for dual high pressure fuel pumps, which we'll talk about more, and just higher flow capabilities to support the higher horsepower. And also because it has a higher rev range and it's kind of designed to have that motorsport setup. So they do a lot of things to compensate for that I don't necessarily think the B58 is limited to, but the S58 just gives you a lot more headroom to support that style of driving. So starting off at the top, when we look at the cylinder head, I thought it was really interesting that this is a 3D printed cylinder head. So they used additive manufacturing to make it, and it just allows them to create much more complex geometries than you would be able to do with typical casting. Then afterwards, they did the final machining for all the mating surfaces so that it could be sealed up, but it helped reduce the weight and again, just helped them create an optimal design for all of the oil flow and coolant flow and things that they wanted it to be capable of. It also supports 2 high pressure fuel pumps, which you guys might know from the S55. They've been doing this on their twin turbo M series engines. So now the S58 is no different. It has twin TU high pressure fuel pumps mounted on top of the cylinder head to support the fuel requirements going to the 6 injectors. Now, of course, this requires an optimized exhaust cam. So the exhaust cam now has 2 high pressure fuel pump lobes instead of 1. This is something where a lot of people have asked, can we retrofit the S58 cylinder head onto the B58 or retrofit this dual high pressure fuel pump setup? But because of the cams and everything that feeds into it, it's not really something that's very likely. And a lot of other things like port injection get past our fuel limits anyway. So it doesn't really seem like a viable option as an upgrade for a B58, but for the S58, it does explain why it's able to support so much power on a stock fuel system. Now, because of the higher horsepower rating, they also upgraded the valve train. So the valves are actually designed to handle additional heat. Again, just because the combustion pressures and everything inside of the engine are greater to support the horsepower, they've also increased from a 3-layer head gasket to a 4-layer head gasket. So again, a couple more things just to support the higher horsepower rating. And another comment that they added is it has larger coolant ports. And again, this is to support the higher heat and all the higher stresses that the engine's going to be supporting, you know, being capable of over 500 horsepower. With those bigger coolant ports, it's going to have an easier job of keeping everything cool and at an ideal operating temperature range. Now, just like the B58 TU, the S58 valve cover has the PCV system built into it. So it's not something separate that you can modify or replace. And it works just like pretty much all the latest BMW engines. So under vacuum, it's going to route all those PCV gases to the head ports and directly back into the intake. But if you're in boost, it shuts that off and routes all the PCV gases back to the intake before the turbo. So Thankfully, I haven't seen a lot of big issues on these engines with the PCV, other than, running high boost that can damage the valve cover. But if you were to have an issue, you're going to have to replace the entire valve cover itself. You can't just replace the diaphragm like you can on a Gen 1 B58. Now, moving down to the engine block, it does also have a lot of upgraded components. All of the internals are forged, so you'll find a forged lightweight crankshaft, as well as forged pistons from the factory. These are actually made by Mali, so if you guys are looking at aftermarket pistons, they're a pretty common company that sell pistons for, various platforms, and this car already comes with forged pistons from the factory. The only thing that I don't like to see, and a lot of people have commented on, is it actually comes with S63 connecting rods. They are forged, but they look slightly smaller and thinner than the connecting rods on the B58 engines. And we've also noticed that they are not using the coated rod bearings anymore. So the ones on the B58 that make it so good and they last so long and handle so much power, on the S58, they went back to a different material that has some of the same properties, but it doesn't quite seem to have the same resistance to wear that the coated bearings on the B58 have. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, of course, as the S58 gets older. I haven't heard of a lot of rod bearing issues yet, but some of the people that have built their engines pulled their rod bearings, and it does show some signs of wear. So we'll kind of see as time goes on. This engine also does have a lower compression than the B58 TU. So with the 6-port TU, we went from 11:1 to 10.2:1. And now going to the S58, it has a 9.3:1 compression ratio. So again, this lower compression allows it to safely handle more boost and make more power without damaging those potentially weaker connecting rods. Now, as far as turbos go, this car actually does have twin turbos. So it has 2 single scroll turbos. Each one is attached to 3 of the cylinders, and it kind of makes a unique intake setup. So you can see basically the 2 intakes are fighting for space to squeeze down there. And then you've got 2 charge pipe exits out of the turbos that kind of combine into one. And then that connects to the throttle body that goes to your intake manifold with an integrated intercooler built in with the air to water intercooler, just like a B58. But this one has like the exposed metal, so it seems like it should be able to do a better job of cooling. And then it comes up to the 6 ports that route it back into the cylinder head. Now let's talk about oiling, because this was a big point of discussion on the S55. A lot of you guys know on the N55, it could potentially run into oil starvation issues around high-speed turns. And so the S55 upgraded their oiling system to avoid that problem. Now the S58 does have similar upgrades, although they take a little bit of a different strategy because there was a lot of concern apparently with the oil pan. This was the first time that BMW was putting an inline 6-cylinder in an M series engine that needed to compensate for X-drive. And so they pointed out that with the oil pan, there's basically a big hole in it for the axles to be able to reach both wheels. So they needed some way to compensate for having the oil pan basically split in half so that it could have adequate oiling around the pickup and handle, high-speed turns. They have the main pump that pulls from the pickup at the back of the engine. That's where majority of the oil will be if you're doing really hard acceleration or just daily driving. It has no problem picking up oil. However, there are 2 big issues that they ran into. One was heavy braking, which obviously these cars come with really big brakes, a lot of tire. And so if you brake really hard and all the oil sloshes to the front of the car, you want to make sure that you still get adequate oil. The other one is, of course, high-speed turns. So if you're handling up to 1.3 G left or right, they compensated with that in the oiling system as well. So what we have going on are 3 oil pickups. There's one at the back of the engine, one at the front left, and one at the front right. And this helps avoid, those issues with heavy braking. So now they have one all the way at the front of the engine that can pick up oil. And also it helps transfer oil from the front of the oil pan to the back of the oil pan. So those pickups don't actually go straight up to the engine. It's just kind of pushing oil back to the main pickup so that it can plumb oil up to the engine and, lubricate all of your internal components. It also has a scavenging system built into the turbos. So the oil drains that come down from the turbos actually plumb directly into the oil system. And the thought process here is if you're going through like a high-speed left turn, for example, all of the oil is going to slosh to the right of the oil pan, and that's where your turbos are. Now, the drain from the turbo is passive, so it just drops due to gravity. But if the high Gs are causing all the oil to pull up on the right side, it can basically sit in the turbo and cook the turbo and damage the internals. So the scavenging pump is actually sucking the oil out to make sure that oil is flowing through the turbos and going back into the oil pan so that it can recirculate through your engine. So now they're not just protecting your rod bearings and engine internals, but it's protecting your turbo as well. So again, I highly recommend checking out the technical training. They go into a lot of detail on this. There are multiple pages dedicated to just the oiling setup and how everything routes and, you know, where oil is being pulled from, where oil is being pushed to. And it's a really complex system for sure, but it seems like it's doing a great job of supporting, you know, the added stresses that come from having an X-drive car with big brakes and a lot of power when it's going around a track. Now, from a cooling standpoint, of course, they improved that as well. So they have a higher flowing water pump, as well as, again, the larger coolant ports throughout the engine to help keep the engine cool. And from the oiling standpoint, they added additional piston oil squirters. So underneath the pistons, you have 2 instead of 1. The second one only activates when it's needed, but in those high load scenarios, you have additional oil spraying on the bottom of the pistons to keep your cylinders cool. Now, from a heat exchanger standpoint, it also does have an upgraded setup. It has multiple heat exchangers across the front of the car that support multiple purposes. It has the big main radiator in the front grills, which we all know that's helping keep everything cool, but this is dedicated to the intake manifold to keep your intercooler cool. They also use one of the auxiliary radiators for that intercooler circuit as well. So now you have 2 intercooler heat exchangers that give you additional cooling capacity. It also does have another main radiator for the engine and an auxiliary radiator. And then it has an oil cooler down at the bottom of the car. This one, you know, you kind of see mixed reviews on it because it's so close to the ground and it can easily be punctured by a rock or something as you're driving over it and dump all your oil on the ground. But keep in mind, this does have a thermostat built in, so it only routes oil to that heat exchanger depending on your high oil temps. So yeah, it's definitely a risky position to put it in. And I know a lot of people like to put grills and protective covers over it to prevent it from being damaged, but it seems to work really well at keeping your oil cool even in the most stressful scenarios. And then one last thing we want to talk about are injectors. And I know this is becoming more and more of a talking point for the TU guys. Now that you have high pressure fuel pump upgrades and stuff, a lot of you are looking at ways to stay DI only without adding port injection. And I will say it seems like the injectors do flow more than the B58 TU. Granted, the B58 TU has injectors that are kind of weak. I mean, they don't flow as much as a Gen 1 injector. So for some reason it flows a little bit less, even though it has a higher flowing high pressure fuel pump. But the S58 injectors do seem to be able to plug in and work just fine. Although I'm not sure how much more horsepower capacity it gives you. I've seen people on the stock injectors make anywhere from 550 to 600 horsepower. And it seems like the S58 injectors are rated for like plus 30%. So that would mean that it could make almost 800 horsepower with just stock injectors. I haven't seen that result. You know, I'm not sure if you guys have, let me know. But it definitely does seem like it gives you a little more headroom if you want to avoid going with port injection. Also, from a fueling standpoint, something nice to see is that we have a low pressure fuel system with a fuel pressure sensor now. So a lot of us have added fuel pressure sensors when we add our motive reflex so that we can actually see what's going on that side of the system. The S58 comes with it from the factory, so you can see it in your logs, even on, you know, a completely stock tune without any additional motive reflex or anything like that. So really cool to see that capability out of the box. But yeah, those are some of the, you know, cooler details I thought about the S58. Again, feel free to read through the article. Let me know if there's anything you think I missed or something that's noteworthy. But overall, the S58 is definitely a tank, and I can't wait to see what the S58 TU can do. Hopefully we have that coming and everything isn't going straight electric or hybrid or whatever, but time will tell if we have anything else in the pipeline. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.